So welcome everybody to the fourth installment of our six-part series on AI in action. We have today's topic is how to drive language personalization at scale with AI featuring Persado. So again, if you joined us last week, we did 3 of these last week. We've got 3 more coming up this week. Go ahead and jump to the next one, Alex. We'll get into some introductions. While we do this, so the final poll, and then I'll stop showing the results here. So we had, are you currently using AI technologies to improve your creative outputs and performance? 22% said yes, 67% said no, 11% not sure. We probably should have taken bets on that one ahead of time. I would have guessed like 70-80% were going to be no. So that kind of jives with what I would have generally thought the answers would be. So thanks for being a part of that. We'll get that out of the way. So welcome to Alex Olesen. He is the Senior Director of Vertical Strategy at Persado, which is one of our big time partners at Marketing AI Institute and one of our top sponsors at the upcoming Marketing AI Conference. So Persado is amazing technology, venture-backed company with some incredible people. So Alex, why don't you tell us just a little bit about Persado and your role there, and then we'll kind of jump into the session today.
Sure. So Persado is an AI content generation and decisioning platform. To your point earlier, Paul, we're actually showing how we harness the power of words to increase the likelihood that consumers respond to the creative that our brand partners are putting out.
Great.
At Persado, my role and my team's role is to be economic thought leaders. So we're responsible mainly for 2 things. First, from a macro perspective, what's the case for change and what's the impetus from a financial perspective for marketers to invest in AI as it pertains to creative? We'll talk in a little bit about some macro trends that we've observed in retail, financial services, around the last couple of fiscal years and what separated the leaders from the laggers. The second thing my team is responsible for is we actually take our customer and prospect data and we project out on a month-by-month basis, should a company choose to partner with us, a reasonable amount of incremental conversions and revenue and clicks that we believe we can drive as a result of our AI-driven creative. So looking forward to the discussion today.
That's really cool because have you read by any chance Prediction Machines? Is that a book that's crossed your path?
I have not yet, no.
Okay, so it's really fascinating because the book is written by some professors, I think from the University of Toronto maybe, and they take the approach from an economic standpoint of the value of AI. And they actually talk about supply and demand of data and being able to look at the economic impact of AI. And then we always advise people, if you're going to invest in artificial intelligence, you need to know the value you're trying to create. So either have to be solving a problem that has a known value assigned to it. So if we do this more efficiently, this is the outcome we expect. Or from a use case perspective, when you're just trying to find those initial pilot projects, similar, know the current cost to do those things or the cost to not do those things. And then if we integrate AI technology, how will that generate outcomes that we can measure? So, it's really cool just to know as you're kind of going through this today, that lens of always be thinking about the value of the AI, not AI because it's the hot trend or the cool term, but the true business impact that it can have for you in your company and in your career. So that's cool background for this.
And great context. If you think about what's around the corner with the pixel and the cookie, in a sense, that's actually going to affect the data supply chain for a lot of our marketers. But then the demand for personalizing interactions between brands and consumers has never been higher. We actually observed a local maximum of consumers changing brands or being more willing to try a new brand during the pandemic.
Wow.
We'll get into that in a little bit. The demand for consumer attention is at an all-time high. And we foresee some effects to the data supply chain as well. And we'll talk about it a little bit later about how Persado aligns to that supply challenge. But we think we're uniquely positioned to provide a new type of first-party data.
Nice. All right, well, let's jump to the next one so we can get rolling into this. This is just the 6 partners that are presenting the AI in Action series, and they're also sponsors of the upcoming Marketing AI conference. So thanks to all of them. If you want to jump to the next one, we can see the 3 sessions from last week. So some of you probably joined us last week, and we talked about AI in the creative workflow, being able to take one ad and turn it into 5,000 variations using AI. We talked about ethics of AI, and we talked about global customer experience through the localization of content with Lilt technology. And then this week, we've got Persado today. We've got Market Muse tomorrow talking about AI and content generation. And then we'll close this out with Drift, talking about engaging and qualifying website visitors with AI. So it's been awesome so far. We're looking forward to another great session today. And then finally, some housekeeping items before I turn this over to Alex. We will be monitoring Q&A. We'll have time at the end. And if there's something urgent, I'll jump in and ask Alex a question as we're going. The chat is open if you need any help. Our team is here to support you. There's a hashtag. We will be able to make this stuff on demand later this week. And then if you aren't signed up for tomorrow's Market Muse session or Drift's session on Thursday, you can still get signed up for those at that bit.ly link there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and I'll fade into the background and jump in every once in a while with some observations and questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So I know we touched on this briefly before, but before I introduce Persado formally, I did just want to recap a couple of the challenges that we are in market to solve. And we believe that they're multi-threaded. First, Persado and our marketing partners are all looking for ways to find and fuel new sources of predictable growth in our business. Like I was mentioning a few minutes ago, the demand for consumer attention has never been higher. And we also believe that there will be limiting supply effects in terms of first-party data, with the cookie and the pixel going away in the next couple of years. Which leads me to my next point. One of the challenges that Persado was founded to solve and is in market to solve on behalf of our customers is that some of the traditional sources of value that we've long known are going away. And we as marketers need to figure out a way to activate data for greater impact while the landscape of privacy and security is changing, like the cookie and like pixel emails. And then finally, as we all know, as marketers, we're constantly under pressure to deliver better, more authentic and in-the-moment experiences to meet our consumers' rising expectations. Not to mention that those expectations aren't really a fixed position. As we've learned throughout the past few years, it's important to show up differently as brands. And one of the things that we'll talk about later are the emotions that different demographics or cohorts of consumers respond to, and how we've actually been able to observe before and after response rates to different parts of what we call the emotional wheel.
Hey, Alex, we've got a couple people pointing out you've got some audio loss coming in and out. I don't know if there's anything we can shut down on your end, if there's any other apps going or anything like that, but just being cognizant of that. Just so just so everybody knows, I am seeing the chat mentioning that.
Is this better? I moved a little closer to the microphone.
Yeah, that actually might do it. We'll keep an eye on it, but I think that's good.
So now to turn the focus over to Persado and what it is that Persado is in business to do. As I mentioned a few minutes before, Persado is an AI content generation and decisioning platform. We unlock the power of words using mathematical certainty. And I'll talk more specifically about what that means later. One of the main value propositions of Persado is we save, in some instances, up to years of testing variants of creatives against each other. Persado provides business leaders with a new kind of first-party data that gives them a roadmap for determining what customer interactions, specifically digital customer interactions, they should be prioritizing. And Persado does this by providing and predicting personalized language that maps specifically to human emotions all the way down to an individual level. Because consumers are not all created equal when it comes to what emotions drive them, what resonates, and also the language that we connect with to take action. And Paul, this is important because, well, as marketers, would we really fly blind without data in any other part of the MarTech stack? If I take a look at the different areas of investment that marketers can make, targeting and segmentation, media mix, promotions and discount, and dynamic pricing. AI-driven technologies are all in use in those subsectors of MarTech investments. And Persado is no different. Persado uses AI-driven creative technology to take human-crafted messages, and we actually codify elements of those messages so that our machine learning engine can generate variants of language that sound human and resonate with different parts of the intended audience. So what this means is, instead of marketers guessing what could work, AI-generated messages can be tested so that creative teams know with mathematical certainty that they're using the optimum message for the best performance.
Yeah, and this is real quick, Alex. I was just to say this is often overlooked by analysts. So there's a really popular study people reference from a McKinsey Global Institute about the trillions of dollars in annual impact that AI can have on businesses, and creative is not included in those categories. And so we've always kind of made the argument, I know Persado feels the same way, that I'm not sure what that number is or how much the true value is. But if you think about how much time and money goes into the creative process across all marketing disciplines, it is a massive amount of money that can be impacted when you think about the efficiencies that can be gained by using machines to support the creative process. So it's an area that there's no debating it's impacted, but I have yet to see a definitive study that actually quantifies that value, but it's massive.
It's actually interesting you bring that up. We contracted a consulting firm earlier this year to help us answer that question. Broad strokes, we basically took a look at the annual revenue of the Fortune 500, which is around $10 trillion. We eliminated roughly 2/3 of that revenue, which is either inorganic, or rather organic growth, or in industries that are not heavily influenced by marketing. Long story short, we did a top-down analysis on the Fortune 500 and how consumers respond to messaging from those particular brands. And our third-party verified estimate is around $155 billion of what we like to refer to as trapped value. So what's interesting about that, Paul, and we'll get into this during the case studies, is that top-down view of roughly, let's call it 15% of any eligible dollar of revenue that Persado can influence, that 15% incremental revenue uplift is in line with what my team models from a bottoms-up basis once we get our hands on actual client data. So very good reinforcement that our macro view and our micro view are actually starting to say the same exact thing. So in terms of the way things have worked before and the way Persado envisions things working in the future, let's think about how we as marketers have traditionally approached the process of creating campaigns. We get our very talented creative teams together to ideate on a concept for a campaign and identify the different parts, media mix, and messages that go into that. Then we make decisions based on past experience, based on what works, which is a little subjective, no matter how sharp we believe our instincts are. And oftentimes we feel intuitively that when a campaign works, we also might get second or third degree confirmation of its effectiveness through a boost in sales or customer acquisitions. The reality is, though, and this is back to the problem that Persado is solving, there's not necessarily mathematical certainty of which variants of that creative are outperforming others. And I think more importantly, insights into which emotions are evoking a higher response rate from certain cohorts of the customer base. So AI-driven creative technologies like Persado, we take human-crafted messages, we codify elements that our machine learning engine can optimize, and then we generate insights based on which emotions are yielding a higher response rate and those which are not. So a little bit about the platform from a high level before I show more specifically how it works. Persado has built the most powerful AI content generation and decisioning solution in the market. Our platform is made up of a handful of very important core capabilities, including first on the left, our experimentation engine, where we actually set up campaigns with our customers and let our machine learn about the customer's brand as well as their customers. Then our predictive engine scales those learnings and predicts which variants of the creative will yield a higher response rate in each cohort of our customers' customer base. The insights engine, which is very important to create a learning organization, one that's constantly improving on its performance. That's going to generate insights and learning in real time back into not only the Persado platform, but more importantly into the creative teams at our customers, so they can learn and apply those insights as well. Then finally, the personalization engine takes those machine learnings, builds on them, and is able to deliver moments that matter all the way down to an individual level. So we're not just talking about segmenting now on an audience basis, we're actually talking about making the individual user feel like they've been reached out to personally. And we're doing all of that at scale. Now, let's actually take a look at a couple of examples of how the Persado machine learning engine works with actual customer case studies. So what we're looking at here is on the top of the slide, a control creative that a retailer came up with on their own. And then what we're looking at on the bottom of the slide is a Persado optimized set of creative. So changing minor parts of the messaging actually made a huge impact for this particular retailer. Using Persado, this retailer's creative team was able to test over 2,000 permutations across 16 different language variants and ran 900,000 impressions to test the different variants of the creative. And after that test, they had determined which ad was the one which was yielding the highest response rate. And in just 3 days, the winning creative, which is shown on the bottom of this slide, had generated over 100% more signups, 112% more orders, and $171,000 of incremental revenue. So, Paul, this was a huge win for their team because, number one, this testing saved, in some instances, probably months of decision making, but was also able to, at the same time, yield over 2,600 incremental orders in just the span of 3 days. And actually, the customer testimonial is really interesting here. This particular retailer belongs to a holdco with sister brands. And this test was so impactful that marketing managers from some of the other brands reached out to this team to ask what they were doing that yielded such an increase in response rate in such a compressed time.
You know, and as a marketer, you know, I'm staring at this, I'm thinking, what is it? Like, what did the machine find? Because all of us have been in creative meetings. We all debated like which headline to use or which subject line to put in the email or how to write the subject line for the blog post or the title. Like, and it ends up just being human intuition and sometimes data. But I look at these and it's like, is it because you got you in there? Is it you won? Like, what emotion is being triggered that actually caused the thing to be the one that wins? And the reality is like, I mean, here you go, you got the breakdown. It's like, what, but that would never come out of a creative meeting. So this is I guess it's a look at how AI can sometimes enable something to be done that just otherwise is subjective opinions is really what marketing often comes down to.
Absolutely. So it's actually really interesting that you bring that up because the intuition of the digital creative team, they actually thought originally that the imagery and formatting elements, like the color of the call to action, would be the most impactful. But in reality, it was down to the language, and it was subtle tonal changes in the headline that made the biggest difference when it came to driving incremental engagement and signups. So a couple of really key points here. "You've really won big," which is a phrase that evokes a sense of achievement, was the emotion that outperformed other variants that were tested, including, here are just a couple of samples. "Let us welcome you with 20% off" was another variant that was tested that evokes the intimacy emotion. So that one did not perform as highly as achievement does. Another variant was "sign up for email and save 20%, which aligns to the encouragement emotion. So these are all effective headlines, which performed well, but not quite as well as the achievement emotion that you see in the winning headline here. And one of the things that we've talked about a couple of times that I think is worth reiterating, the amount of time that Persado can save to generate 16 variants at once versus doing head-to-head A/B testing. Some of our customers have actually quantified it saved them years in terms of decision making, even on one campaign alone. So a lot of incremental revenue benefit, as well as bottom line benefit as well, and expense avoidance. And we've actually observed that emotions account for over 60% of whether or not a customer chooses to engage with messages. And specifically, Paul, we actually noticed this across different channels. So whereas achievement may skew very strongly in email, that's not necessarily the case for the same cohort in SMS or in-app. And we're able to actually granularly look at that level of insight with our existing customers.
And I think I find interesting, and again, what AI enables is, even if you wrote all the rules that codified how to achieve each of these emotional triggers, the execution level needed for humans to actually do that, it's impossible to scale. So, I mean, it literally is just something that prior to AI's ability to understand and generate language and then learn based on data coming into that tells it what worked, we weren't able to do this kind of thing in marketing prior.
That's a great point. And what I think makes Persado very exciting is marketers are already investing in these campaigns. They're investing in creative. And we take existing investments in CDPs and CRMs and data lakes, and we make them more effective. I like to compare Persado to the tendons and ligaments, let's say, of the MarTech stack. We influence fast twitch muscles and we accelerate decision making. So what we're looking at here is our wheel of emotions, which has been created over years by adapting research in psychology and extensive data analysis. So rather than explaining human behavior in a general way, this is an ontological classification that's intended to capture and index varying semantic and affective differences for the purpose of isolating triggers that actually drive cognitive response and drive action. So put a different way, in behavioral psychology, there are 15 primary emotions which people respond to in marketing. And one of the things that we work with on our with our customers is providing detailed analytics on which one of these emotions their customers are responding to for every campaign that we run together with our existing clients. So if I want to get a little more in the weeds on the actual process of how our customers use Persado, on the upper left-hand corner is where I'll start. So it starts with a customer who initiates an experiment via Persado's SaaS customer portal. And this takes about 5 minutes to initiate an experiment. This involves submitting a control creative, which the messaging machine learning then uses as a baseline. Persado's AI will then generate 16 ad variants, which span over 1,000 unique permutations. And leveraging our suite of integrations, in just a few clicks, a marketer can send all 16 sample variants in order to learn from the market which elements are resonating with your audience. We collect data in real time from audience engagement, and that powers what we call an experiment analysis. Persado then identifies the precise words and phrases which drove the highest engagement with an audience, and then produces the most effective message for the campaign as the winner. This message is then put into our wider use by the customer as the foundation for any campaign. And this is where the power of taking a new and scientific approach to generating the best message for campaigns is evident. And this is where organizations actually learn from themselves over time by using Persado.
Yeah, I mean, I love this slide because, again, you don't have to understand how machine learning works or what exactly natural language processing does or how it does it, but it shows at a really fundamental level the scale at which you can do something that humans can't do. It's not getting rid of the creatives. It's not replacing your designers and your copywriters. It's just enhancing what they're capable of and giving them, in essence, a superpower to test stuff that they would never even create otherwise. So, I always think some people get so caught up in, it's overwhelming to think about AI and it's abstract and I just don't want to have to deal with it. But when you look at it, it's like if you write headlines or if you pick images or if you figure out what promotional offer to come up with, if now or in 2-3 years, you're not using tools to enable this, everybody you're competing against is going to. And I'm sorry, but human intuition only goes so far when you are up against people who are scaling intelligence from machines. So I just see this as the inevitable outcome of where marketing is going. And some people are just resistant to go there with it.
We actually observed this. We drank our own champagne earlier this year, Paul. We took a look at 300 retailers and the words that their executives mention in public forums. Okay. So anytime an executive participates in a Mad Money interview or earnings call transcripts, and we came up with a list of keywords that indicate digital readiness. We actually did this with one of our data partners that my team uses on a daily basis. And what we found was retail executives who mentioned omni-channel marketing, click and collect, buy online, pick up in store, all of which are very in vogue trends in customer engagement for retail. Executives who mentioned those keywords more frequently in the last 36 months, their retail brands were outperforming the stock market by up to 20% in terms of shareholder return. Their e-commerce revenue was outgrowing the laggard cohort, so executives who weren't mentioning these trends. Their e-commerce revenue was outgrowing their peers by up to 4x in some instances. And they were monetizing a lot of these order fulfillment modalities that now actually seem very commonplace. But you see, it's actually not a coincidence that the forward-thinking retail teams were implementing these technologies, and it's paid off.
That's a great study. I mean, so we just finished the manuscript for an upcoming book on marketing AI that I guess we haven't really publicly announced yet. So if you're on this, there's a book coming out sometime. But we cited Mark Cuban, who, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks and Shark Tank guy and everything. And he had tweeted that in essence, the companies that figure out AI, and not just the stuff you see outward, but the internal workings and the integration to operations and HR and marketing and sales, the ones who are really thinking ahead dominate their peers. And from an investing standpoint, that's actually what I do is I only invest in companies that I believe see the future and are operationalizing towards it. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at too, is if you did the same thing with earnings calls and you started analyzing CFOs and CEOs and how often they're talking about natural language processing and machine learning and deep learning, my guess is those companies are dominating their peers because they value data more than their peers and they're operationalizing its use to make smarter decisions in their company. So it's a fascinating stuff. I don't want to dwell on it too much because I know we still got some more to get through here. But that's really cool stuff.
Fascinating. So I wanted to also share another case study with a company called Rappi, which is an order fulfillment, same-day delivery provider in Latin America. Recently, Rappi also expanded its presence into financial services with the formation of RappiPay, which is a digital banking subsidiary within Rappi. focused on revolutionizing the way digital banking was delivered to its customers. So they have a very tech-savvy, data-forward team at RappiPay, and they recognize that in order to meet their very aggressive customer acquisition goals, it was critical to understand channels and content that would most resonate with their customers. So RappiPay saw an opportunity to apply creative decision-making with mathematical certainty to their outreach campaigns to try and grow their customer base. As a fellow tech disruptor, Persado was a great partner for RappiPay. In fact, Juan Guerra, who's the CEO of RappiPay Mexico, was already familiar with Persado and our reputation for delivering impact within financial services. Bolstered by our strong track record working together, Juan was confident in our ability to use language to unlock value for RappiPay and ultimately drive their vision of increased customer acquisition forward. More specifically, their credit card called RappiCard launched in January of this year and was gaining traction in Mexico. And it's actually on target to reach an ambitious goal of, I believe, nearly doubling their customer base. So what we're going to look at on the next slide are, to our earlier conversation, Paul, seemingly very nominal changes to the emotives and the way in which RappiPay is communicating with its customers, specific to push notifications and email campaigns in order to drive waitlist subscriptions. So if we take a look at the creative on the left and we take a look at the creative on the right, what we noticed, the emotive that was skewing very positively was exclusivity for driving waitlist signups, specifically with push notifications and email ads. So implementing this skew towards exclusivity in this waitlist signup campaign, we actually saw a 99% increase in applications for RappiCard. So that was phase one of the partnership with RappiPay earlier this year. Phase two, we actually tried a different channel, Facebook ads, and we took a lot of the learnings from the success of the waitlist campaigns. And we did a couple of things. Number one, we noticed that even the placement of the card, so you see two variants, you see one with a picture of a man on the left, one with the card more prominently displayed, that had an effect on overall responsiveness to the campaign, as well as the emotion of exclusivity. In this case, taking learnings from the waitlist campaign, dragging them down funnel to Facebook, we saw 179% incremental conversions of customers off the waitlist and actually signing up for the RappiCard. So a very successful two-step experimentation with RappiPay earlier this year. So if I take a look into the specifics of what actually worked, you can see again the two variants of the creative here. We can observe that the image element in this particular case actually drove the majority of audience engagement. That accounted for 52% of audience response rate. So just by making the image of the RappiCard itself more prominent, the engagement rates went through the roof. So to our conversation, I guess, throughout this discussion, Paul, seemingly very nominal changes to creative that, and I think this is really important, that marketers are already investing in, have made very fundamental changes to the financial success of these marketing campaigns. So following the formatting, emotional elements also made significant contributions towards response rate. In this particular case, gratification performed well in the bold call to action statement, which outperformed Rappi's original control messaging that banked on fascination as their emotional plug. So here's where we're tapping into two different parts of that wheel of emotion to drive an increase in customer behavior simply based on the emotive that Persado's AI recommends as the most likely to drive a response. So the last section here, why now? Why is it important to consider AI, specifically Persado and AI for creative, as part of any fundamental investment in MarTech. We were mentioning earlier, Paul, what's the size of the gap, right? What's the cost of doing nothing in terms of not acting on potential decrease in first-party data supply, but also an increase in demand for customer attention span? We estimate, as a result of research from McKinsey and Deloitte, that 65% of digital ad spend in the US will be on programmatic advertising, yet access to third-party data will be lost by the majority of marketers by 2022. So here you see actually the supply and demand curve kind of working against each other. So you see audiences growing and their attention span shortening, and there being a lot of propensity to change brands. Like we were mentioning at the beginning of the presentation, we saw a local maximum of shoppers willing to try new brands last year, yet losing access to critical data that is required for decision making. And this change has been a long time coming. If we take a look at the last 8 years of how browsers have slowly started ceasing to collect personal data. It started with Firefox and Safari in 2013, and now Chrome, which dominates a large share of internet traffic, also starting to cease the end of third-party data collection. This means that there's an important inflection point between what marketers will define themselves as market leaders and how they adapt to this change in the data supply chain, and those who may not necessarily adapt quite as quickly. And we believe, like we were mentioning earlier in the presentation, that Persado is uniquely positioned to address this challenge in terms of data collection and personalization. Brands can now take a new kind of first-party data that's mapped to language and emotions, and customize their creative outreach down to a very personal level, and understand which words and emotions actually respond well with their customers. Over time, that language will learn as a result of continual testing and applications through our machine learning engine. And the personalized language profiles are based on the actual cognitive response of customers and data that our marketers are constantly collecting from their customer base. And I do think that there's an ethical component to this as well. And we believe that Persado is uniquely positioned to provide this data ethically, because it is based on language and emotive response. And it is also cognizant of privacy, which at the end of the day is also something that the marketer and the modern consumer is demanding. So in terms of what's next for Persado and what's on our roadmap coming up, right now, we can generate content for any given customer segment or set of attributes. We do that by identifying the language profile for each segment and tailoring a personalized message that matches to each segment. In some cases, we'll actually identify differences in language preferences, when in some cases there might not be a difference. Clients, when they work with us, can share their defined target segments, and we can develop language profiles for those audience segments. And in the event that we see significant differences, generate personalized language to match to the relevant cohort. As you can see in this example, in some cases, we can actually see differences in preferences, while in other subsets of an audience, there may not be any difference. But right now, our clients can really only segment their customers by demographic or behavioral attributes, which doesn't necessarily mean that an individual consumer within a cohort would respond to the same language, to the same set of emotives, the same set of words. But within each customer segment, individuals do have unique language preferences. In fact, even when they have similar demographics or propensity to buy similar products, it may not necessarily mean that they're going to react the same to the same set of emotives. So one of the things that we are working on is pulling down that level of specificity down to the individual level and make communication at scale feel like it is being delivered on a one-to-one basis. So I'll wrap here with some final thoughts on how we can get started together, working with potential partners. So it's Persado's mission to work with our customers to be more accountable and data-driven in terms of their marketing investments, which is a process that involves time and attention in three main areas, specifically people, tech stack, and then onboarding and scaling. So if I start with people, it's really about becoming more data-oriented and accountable, and that can be a change for some organizations. We need to focus mostly on data literacy and tech literacy. And I don't just mean bringing in data scientists or MarTech experts to operate on your teams. This is a holistic effort across creative and data science. Next, in terms of tech stack, like I was mentioning before, we believe that Persado provides a financial halo effect to existing MarTech investments. And then finally, in terms of onboarding and scaling, I think one of the main takeaways, Paul, and you touched on this earlier, is the barrier to entry is a lot lower than may meet the eye. And what it takes to get started on a campaign run on Persado is we're a very, very nimble tech partner. And as you saw with that retail example, within the span of one campaign over 3 days, we were actually able to drive a fair amount of incremental value in a short period of time. So that just about does it for everything that I was prepared to talk about today. So Paul, back to you.
That's great, Alex. If you want to jump to the next slide, just a quick, if you're not familiar with Marketing AI Institute, you can learn more about us at marketingaiinstitute.com. Tons of resources. I think we've published 800 or 900 articles about AI. There's online courses and beginner's guide and all kinds of resources to help you get started. And then marketingacademy.ai is the online education platform. And then the last thing we'll leave you with is our Marketing AI conference. If you want to jump to the next slide here, Alex, is coming up September 13th and 14th. There's more than 20 speakers, including Cade Metz from the New York Times, talking about his book, Genius Makers, Karen Howell from MIT Tech Review. There is an AI in Action 25 code there that'll get you 25% off. So we hope you'll join us for that as well. And with that, if you want to stop the screen share, Alex, we'll just go ahead and take some questions, which we had come in throughout. So let me, there was one actually that tied to I think the end slide you were showing. So it said, can you say more about the process of adjusting your product to a specific company? Does Persado use the performance data from the campaigns the company ran prior to Persado for training, or does Persado learn exclusively from the campaigns that are prepared by Persado? So I think what we're talking about there is that ability for, are we learning from this anonymous clump of data, or are we actually learning from personalized data for a specific brand that learns its consumers over time?
It's a combination of both. So here we actually see the unification of what my team specifically does and what our technical team do. We will understand the baseline that one of our prospective customers is working with in terms of response rate, channel mix, frequency, the creative that's being used, and understand the intuition of the creative teams and what they believe is resonating well with the market. Okay. We will compare that against public macro data. So a lot of the general data that I was talking about in the beginning of the conversation around which emotives which emotives drive a higher response for which type of shoppers. And then we'll run variant testing for that particular brand's cohort of customers.
And then we had another one around, does Persado only work on web channels or can apply to email and social? Now that came in earlier before you were showing some examples of SMS and email, but just where is Persado able to assess and generate language for customers?
Yep. So not just web, email, social for sure. We actually even have IVR capabilities as well that we've noticed help streamline and reduce customer service costs, as well as can help boost net promoter score. So it is truly an omni-channel.
And then in terms of languages, we had a question around what languages does Persado cover, and related, potentially, is Persado's performance similar in other languages like Chinese or Russian? Would you have any use cases that you could share? And obviously you might not have them right now, but do you have anything in terms of other languages and its performance?
I do know we cover a variety of languages. I'm not quite sure what the list is. It is pretty extensive, but I think that's probably going to be a specific follow-up.
Yeah, that's great. How about, so a question is specific to machine learning. How can machine learning and specifically Persado actually make language and content more creative and strategic? Now, we kind of talked about it, but I think it's a good theme to come back around to, of how what we're talking about here and the AI's capabilities actually enhances that creative process.
Sure. So I'd say I'd answer this from a couple of different directions. I'll start first by putting my economist hat on. These investments in creative and MarTech are already existing when Persado starts to work with one of our customers. At the end of the day, one of the things that we focus on with our existing partners is maximizing their investments in their CRM, their CDP, ESP, etc. We want to take a marketing machine that's already working and we want to make it work better. We saw some, we'll call it last miling, in terms of making tactical changes that have strategic benefit, changing the emotion, changing the order of words, changing where images are placed in an ad that generate transformational returns in some instances. I think how Persado applies strategically and how AI for language generation applies strategically. And I mentioned that study across the 300 retailers where we actually looked at language, the language that executives speak, and how that monetizes, or how investments that they make monetize themselves over a period of time. But I also think understanding broad trends in terms of different consumer preferences. We took a look at macro traveler data and saw that millennials took trips within a tighter window than other cohorts and responded to emotions around capitalizing on a work from home environment and needing to be rejuvenated. So those are great insights that you can apply to a variety of different lines of business or industries. And that's the type of unique insight that I believe we provide, specifically in an environment where marketers are faced with the challenge of losing a bit of first and third party data. And I believe makes this core to any MarTech strategy.
This is kind of a cool question, and then we'll maybe wrap after this one. But does Persado speak slang? And I'll actually add to that, does it use emojis? I'm curious in the language generation.
A good question. I actually do not know the answer to.
Yeah, we'll have to. Yeah. We'll get back to that one. I was wondering because I've never seen examples of it in Persado when we look at the site and seen examples before. That is an interesting one because I would be curious how that does play into that emotional wheel and the impact it can have. So yeah, we'll get back to people on that one. That's an interesting one. Well, this has been phenomenal, Alex. Do you have any final thoughts for people as they think about AI in the creative process, either from the application of it or to your kind of core area of the economic impact?
My biggest takeaway from working at Persado is how accessible I believe the technology is, and the fact that it doesn't need to be daunting to experiment with language and apply AI to marketing and creative. I didn't even realize how prevalent the influence was in my everyday life. Now I think about how I respond to ads differently, or whether I respond to an SMS versus a email or push notification. So it's interesting to see both sides. But I'd say my main takeaway in terms of getting started is reach out. We'd love to understand more about how marketers out in the audience are leveraging AI and creative today, and how we might be able to partner with you in the future.
Well, thanks again, Alex. This has been fantastic, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. We hope we'll see you at the next one tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much.